that you're with us today, Laura. Thank you for taking time out of what I'm sure is a very busy schedule for you. And thanks everyone for joining today on screen. So don't forget, because we are watching, somebody looking at you all the time during the next hour. So just be careful what you're up to, especially you, Mr. Johnson. I've only got one thing to say to you, sir, and that is all for one, one for all. Kevin will understand the reference to Liverpool Football Club's result at the weekend, for which I'm clearly delighted being a good Evertonian. Anyway, enough of this frivolity. On to the serious matters, for which, of course, transport is hugely serious, particularly for a region such as the West Midlands. It underpins an awful lot of the ambition that the city of Birmingham and its accompanying peer cities and towns have. And the West Midlands, of course, Laura, is hoping for and has secured some significant sums of investment in recent months and in months going forward. So let's start on a positive without getting into all the challenges, and we could spend an hour having a whinge of what's happened over the last 10 months, but let's not do that. Let's take a glass half full approach to our discussion and tell us what we've achieved, which is not insignificant, as I say, over the past 10 months, but also what we've got to look forward to in terms of that transport infrastructure improvement programme that you and your colleagues have put in place.
Sure, I'd be delighted to. So we've got a massive program of investment that's been going on in the West Midlands over probably the past 4 years, with another few still to go. One of the things I think we've probably been the most proud of is that we have been able not only to continue, but to accelerate works on our light rail system, so our metro, down Broad Street, and take advantage of, sounds like a terrible way to phrase it, but take advantage of COVID while the bars and restaurants were shut, and try to accelerate some of those works so that we're out of the way when restrictions are lifted, giving those businesses the best chance of getting back up on their feet, and been able to do well with a really COVID secure work site. So that's been great, and that's been progressing. We've rolled out a trial of e-scooters, and I think I heard somebody say yesterday that you could go around the globe 4 times with the amount of kilometers that have been used on that trial, and it's slowly also now rolling out to the University of Warwick, and also soon into Wolverhampton and Coventry. It's been really successful in challenging some of the last mile issues in and around Birmingham. We've successfully gotten a number of business cases through, whether that's Perry Bar rail station, which works are imminent in, ready for redevelopment for the games, or University Station, again, which is redeveloping that station, which is busier than Crewe. It's a little known fact, but somebody assures me that that is true. Serves a huge hospital campus, a university as well, but it's just not fit for purpose. So redeveloping that station and getting the business cases through for bringing a station forward at Willenhall and Darlaston in the Black Country, and 3 stations along the Camp Hill lines in South Birmingham. So really a huge amount of investment going into bringing new stations into life in the West Midlands. And we have a really good suburban rail network here. It's different probably to other cities where other cities may have a stronger tram network, but we have a really excellent suburban rail network. So that, alongside the continuing to develop our tram network, we've started work on Wednesbury to Barley Hill extension, and some utility diversions in the city centre, ready for the tram works beginning on the east side of Birmingham. We also have done some interesting things that I think I'm really proud of, actually, through the pandemic. So we repurposed what were our ring and ride vehicles, which, you know, it's a sort of a demand responsive service to some of our most vulnerable, who clearly shouldn't have been out traveling during the pandemic. And we've been running free shuttle services between some of our key rail and metro stations and our hospitals, and giving free travel to NHS workers, which we've had, I think, just over 36,000 journeys this year from NHS workers. So a really valuable way to think differently about how can we make the most of the assets we have at this time and do our best. So we For a while, we were taking free travel before 9:30 for pensioners, because that's when they were being allowed to come shop, which was worked right against the concessionary pass hours. So we relieved that, and have done that again now. If you can demonstrate, even just tell a driver that you're on your way to a vaccine. Again, if lifting that free travel before 9:30 for older people. So we've been working on a huge capital program alongside trying to think about what network recovery is going to look like, and that's probably another question we'll get to in a bit. But yeah, it's been hugely busy, and I think it's been fascinating to learn that it's really easy to shut a network down, and it's actually really difficult to build a network back up again. So been lots of lessons I didn't expect to learn over the past year.
Yeah, I think that's probably true of all of us, Laura, to be fair. But, you've mentioned so many positives in terms of investments that come into the West Midlands. And I think what you've achieved now is some real, inter-regional connectivity wins. That, if we are to see the region grow and hit the ambitions that certainly Andy Street and others have, then that's crucial. But you've mentioned there, over the last 9-10 months, all transport networks have taken a big hit, both in terms of its financial performance, but also, I guess, in terms of how you're going to attract passengers back onto the public transport, and then feeling it's going to be safe to do so. So let's go on to that recovery plan that you have. All the statistics I've seen, Laura, suggest that actually public transport is still one of the safest places to be during the pandemic. The spread of the virus on public transport has been next to nothing. But you could say the same about hospitality venues, and they found themselves closed as well. So what are the sort of messages that we're looking to get out there as hopefully we begin to return to work into our city and town centres through the spring and into the summer?
I think we have to recognize we've gone backwards, right? So there was a point in time when we were encouraging people not to use public transport. And even recently, despite quite a lot of lobbying, there was a national campaign that said, the coronavirus takes the train too. All of that messaging just sets us back. So we are now back behind where we were, and we are without a doubt seeing a car-led recovery. Rail patronage is at about 10%, metro bus 30-40. That's roughly the same up and down the country, give or take. Part of that's obviously we are in the middle of a lockdown, but even in between lockdowns, we were seeing sort of 60% on bus and tram, and still very, very low on rail. So there are a couple of big issues here. So one of which is that we need our cities to recover, right? So people need to be able to know that they can travel in and out of cities safely, and that public transport is there to do that. A lot of it will be the statistics. So big international organizations, as well as through Urban Transport Group here, we're working to bring that evidence base together. So it's one thing telling people it's safe. It's another thing demonstrating to people that it's safe. So giving people the statistics on how to do it. And then also, making people feel safe. So enforcing face covering. So in the beginning, we were distributing face masks on tram, for example. So our conductors are walking up and down. If somebody didn't have one, instead of throwing somebody off, it's much easier to say, oh, perhaps you've forgotten your mask today. Here you go. Now you can put it on, can't you? And that gives people who are traveling a sense of comfort, actually, because what people want to see is that it's safe. They have to witness that themselves. And I mean, on a really personal note, the first time I took the train after sort of the first lockdown, even I was anxious. I'm thinking, if I'm anxious about this, how must everybody else feel? I mean, this is what I do for a living. I know exactly how safe it is. But that feeling of like, I'm about to get on board a train. Is it going to be as safe as I hope it's going to be? Are other passengers going to be treating it safely? So that soft bit of that work is hugely important. And then there's going to have to be a national campaign about behavior change. So if you asked people what they liked about the first lockdown, when we went out and did a whole bunch of surveys to people, what they liked were obvious things about, more time with their family, but actually more time to walk and cycle. They said they liked how quiet the streets were, actually how quiet the skies were, and actually feeling safer on their streets. So we know that people don't want to see this become a car-based recovery, but that means everybody will have to change their behavior. So I think nationally we'll have to have a campaign that puts people back onto public transport. But no matter what you tell people, they'll behave by what they see. So, working with safer travel police, again, distributing masks, making sure that where there are people who are not either obeying the rules or flagrantly disobeying the rules, they're thrown off. We have conditions of carriage to remove people from that. All of that will be needed in order to build that confidence back up again. But for people who are regular users of public transport through this pandemic, the general response has been, it's clean, it's safe, it's reliable. And that's what people want. But I don't underestimate, Frank. I think it's going to be really difficult. It's going to be a long time. But we also know that cities especially don't work with what, as an American, Kevin Serby said this a million times, don't work without mass transit. I think it's the Victoria line. There's something like 60,000 journeys an hour. So it's great that we have e-scooters, but if everyone got off the tube and got on an e-scooter, we'd have a whole different problem, right? So we know that that's what makes cities work, and we've got to invest in making sure that people can go back to it.
And when you're starting to look at strategies to get people back onto public transport safely, Laura, are any conversations taking place about passports? So, if people have had a test within the last 72 hours, if people have had the vaccination, then actually we allow them access and prioritise those passengers? Or is that just too complex and complicated, given the scale of the numbers that you guys have to deal with?
Yeah, I think we haven't had that conversation at sort of an urban transport level. There are issues around confrontation, around timing, around timetabling, how long it would take to check. I think what's most important for people is that that sort of face and space element of hands, face, right? So it's that when you're sat down, it's that somebody doesn't come sit right down next to you without a face covering on, which instantly puts you in a position where you're feeling anxious. You don't know who they are. So it's about getting that at the door, getting that through bus stations, about marking off seats, and it's about passengers also respecting each other and asking other people to respect them, which is, people don't often like confrontation. But I think the only place I've heard those conversations being had sort of nationally, Frank, are around air travel as opposed to urban travel. But I think people are comforted at the rate at which we've seen the vaccine roll out. So if that continues, I think that will also hopefully give people a bit more confidence.
I want to talk about the airport and air travel a little later in the conversation, as you can imagine, but let's stick with public transport at a more local level. And, we talk about the challenges around attracting people back onto our trains, our buses and so on. But there is a huge agenda emerging around environmentally friendly, green, hitting those targets, and whatever else you may disagree with the government about, they are committed to that. And now we have a US president who apparently is going to re-sign up to those sort of targets as well. And that gives surely some confidence to you and your industry sector to say, well, actually, there will be support to enable people to come back onto public transport as quickly as possible. Because if we don't do that, as you say, Laura, a car-led recovery is not going to enable the politicians to hit those important targets.
So there are two big factors for me around that motivation for change. So one of which is, as you say, it's completely counterintuitive to have a car-led recovery and achieve your climate change ambitions. Simply that's counterfactual. So equally, we need to green the public transport fleet. So more that we can do around electrification, looking at electric and hydrogen vehicles. But, I talk to so many people who are like, I really care about the environment, but the problem is that you try to order an electric vehicle, you can't get one for love nor money. And it's that sort of next step, which is, it's not just about what you personally drive, it's actually about how you change your behavior, and just changing your vehicle alone isn't going to help it. So we've got a massive imperative around the environmental agenda, and any behavior change campaign would need to take that into account. There's another one that it to me is about social justice, right? So I heard somebody much more clever than me say, if the coronavirus pandemic is a storm, then everybody is in the same storm, but not everybody's in the same boat, right? So whether what was the Telegraph called it, the COVID, the work from home aristocracy, and there's all sorts of information that's coming together, but it's safe to say that this pandemic has had a disproportionately severe impact on some of our most deprived communities. If what comes out of this recovery is that we are going to struggle to make sure that our entire network can run. So I'll give you an example. At the moment, the government are subsidizing bus operators to continue to run a full service. There might be a point in time when the Treasury decides that's no longer affordable. So if those numbers then change, then we have private operators who are looking at the bottom line, who inevitably are going to say, well, without that subsidy, since we don't have 100% of patronage that we used to have, we're going to have to make changes to our network. They will go through, they will find the lines that are the least commercial, give them the smallest commercial return, and they will stop operating on those lines. Now, those people who will have that impact are very much likely to be the people who have already had the hardest time coming through COVID. So we are going to have almost a double whammy effect. 30% roughly of the people in the West Midlands don't have access to a vehicle. So we have a big proportion of our population who rely on public transport. How horrendous is it going to be if we come out the other side of this with a car-led recovery, which is fine for the people who, have probably been the least impacted economically or personally by COVID, with a public transport system that lets down the people who have already been disproportionately impacted the most. So there's a bit about social justice, if that's the right phrase, as well, about how we choose to come through this pandemic. And I think there's a great opportunity for transport authorities, and certainly what we are doing currently as a transport authority is re-looking at our network now. Actually, what are we going to do if we're faced with cuts? So how do we make better use of demand responsive transport? What are we going to do about the last mile? How do we feed our fixed lines, which is sort of jargon for how do I make sure everyone can get to a heavy rail or a light rail station, by bus? So we don't have a competition between modes. Actually, we have one integrated network. And that's harder to do here in the West Midlands, where we have a deregulated network, than it is in London per se. But I can't see any future for any city that isn't going to have to genuinely reimagine how its networks work better, more efficiently. And then frankly, we've got a job to do to sort of modernize aspects of public transport. I mean, if you look at bus, and you look at Uber, they've got a major disruptor in their industry. And I would challenge to say, when was the last time bus hugely modernized to deal with that challenge? So again, there's an opportunity. It's a difficult one, but we've got to go back to basics on our networks now and making sure we're getting them right. They need to be intuitive, they need to be legible, they need to have integrated ticketing, they need to be equitable, and they need to provide access, especially to those people who rely on them the most. So there's a big job to do in the face of what I think inevitably will be less funding.
Yeah. I want to move on to the West Midlands connectivity to the rest of the country in a second. HS2 obviously is never far from the headlines in terms of the transport industry. But before I do that, an interesting point that you make, Laura, about this coronavirus, the pandemic impacting on different people in different ways. And it strikes me that, you know, those of us who are fortunate enough to be in white collar jobs, if I can put it that way, use old money terms, I've been very fortunate in that we're not on the front line. You know, we can choose if we wish to go into our office. I'm in there today, you know, socially distanced, it's all very safe. It's far better than having kids running around and throwing things at you and trying to get you to help with homework that you don't understand any better than they do. But if I'm a bus driver, or I'm a conductor on a train, or I operate in any of those sort of jobs, then I haven't had the choice to work from home. And I do think that there's been, you know, not necessarily the focus that there needed to be on that blue collar, white collar split over the last 9-10 months. You know, there's clearly, and I suppose obviously, been concern about NHS and care workers. Yeah, I get that. But those people who are working for you, they're putting themselves at the same sort of risk every day of the week. And I've seen some figures early days of the pandemic in London where bus drivers were being infected at an enormously high rate. And so I just wonder what sort of mechanisms, what processes you've had to put in place from a HR perspective to make sure that, you know, those staff are being looked after as best you possibly can look after them.
Yeah, it's been a real challenge. And also when you manage a combination of people who are both sort of home-based and outwardly facing based, thinking really carefully about your messaging, because, you know, because not all your staff are feeling and going through the exact same thing at the exact same time. So making sure that those staff have access to all the PPE early, making sure that everything was as absolutely clean as possible, and that they also knew how to raise any questions that they had with us, you know, instantly. For me, going out, you know, you've got to go out and see it yourself as a leader. You've got to be out in your bus stations and in your train stations and understand how that feels. You know, we've had bus station managers been spat at, you know, that's just, it's horrible anytime. But I mean, you know, most people aren't conscious of how that will feel in this pandemic, and just how close people are to the edge anyway in a moment like this. So we've worked really well actually through there's a group called the Urban Transport Group, which is all of the transport authorities from TfL all the way up to Newcastle. And we've been trying to share best practice between each other, look abroad to understand best practice well, to make sure that those outward facing staff have all the support possible. For just recently for our metro drivers, for example, we've arranged lateral flow testing for them, for whomever wants to have them, as often as they want to have them. And that's gone down really well. It's, you know, it's just giving people every opportunity to feel safe and empowered. And again, a really interesting one was that thing about, we bought a whole bunch of face masks and then gave them to people to hand out. And that made a big difference to our conductors and our bus station managers, because they said the way that they approach somebody who's not adhering to the rules has a really big difference on how that person then reacts to them. So giving them a way to diffuse a situation before it becomes a situation and stops any sort of conflict, allows to sort of the pressure levels to go down. The other thing is our Safer Travel Police and the British Transport Police have been fantastic, coming out to where they need to come out in order to support our frontline workers. And we had to reorganize some of our bus stations because they just weren't organized in order for people to queue in the way that keeps people sort of socially distant. And I think the best thing you can do is to listen to those people who are out. They know better than we do what needs doing. Ask the team, what do they need? What are they complaining? What is not feeling safe? What has worked? What isn't working? What would they like to see? And then listen to your staff and do your best to give them exactly what they need. And you know, we've had levels of sickness probably on par with, you know, with other areas, but I think that's probably the best thing you can do. And then just to remember to say thank you, because I think it's easy for everybody else to forget what they go through every day. And especially our bus station managers will tell you they love their job, because 90% of the people that travel on the network are amazing, and they love to feel like they're helping them, and they enjoy it. But they all are dealing with the 10% of the job that in this particular pandemic is probably 100% less pleasant, if that makes sense. So it's amplified, I think, on both sides. They feel huge pride in what they do and how they're helping, but equally that which challenges them much more significantly.
Absolutely. Well, I'm sure I speak on behalf of everyone on the call today to say that we're very thankful for the work and the effort that they've put in over the last 9-10 months, Laura, and certainly without them, then the economy would have been in an even worse state than we find it at this moment in time. Yeah. I mentioned, the great work that's been done on the investment secure for better interregional connectivity across the West Midlands. But of course, High Speed Rail 2 has been on the agenda. I feel as though I've been talking about it for about 20 years now. I'm sure it's not that long, but it just feels that it's that long. Is it progressing in the way that you would have hoped? Has there been any delays because of the pandemic, or actually have we been able to take the opportunity of shutdown to actually crack on with some of the work that needed to be done?
Well, for us, we've got a couple major sort of interfaces. So one is trying to design in a tram stop into the Curzon Street station in Birmingham, and certainly quite a lot of work has gone on around that. And then the other is how we better connect the interchange station that's going to be down in Solihull, so that what we don't wind up with is it's just a big car park in the middle of that greenfield. So for us, I can't remember, I'm going to say 6 years ago now, maybe even 7, we published, which was something called an Hs2 Growth Strategy, which was basically about how do we ensure that every resident of the West Midlands is 40 minutes by public transport to one of those 2 stations. Not even necessarily because they're going to want to board a train there and to go somewhere, although they very well might, but because we also know they're going to be centers of growth around economic activity. And actually, we want every single person to know that if their job's in either of those 2 locations, or the other growth that comes in around it, that they can access it. So a whole host of schemes, I haven't even come on to the Commonwealth Games, but a whole host of schemes that we're putting in place have been accelerated for the Commonwealth Games, actually provide some of that connectivity. So whether they're the bus rapid transit schemes that are going in place, or those metro schemes, a lot of that work is in place. So we hope to be ready to capitalize on it. Every major city around the globe will tell you that if you have a major transport interchange, where multimodal interchange, in a pleasant environment, those often become destinations in themselves. So we're happy to do that. I think inevitably there have been some delays to HS2, but I'm not necessarily privy to all the detail. But there's been obviously a review, and I think we got through that critical point within a grade, and we've got a notice to proceed on phase 1. So every reason to think that will crack on. And I know that certainly in the West Midlands, we've definitely seen a lot of economic growth based on that investment and on that certainty. So, now I think it's sort of paramount that we do our best to make sure that, we're all returning to cities. And I am an urbanist. So, my view is cities have survived plagues, cities have survived wars. We are in the middle of something that feels hugely transformational, but ultimately cities are places that attract people because they're places of agglomeration, and they're places of opportunity and culture and excitement and all sorts of reasons why they will return to those places. So for me, I don't want to lose focus on that. I understand we're in a moment, and it will take some time to recover. But if you look back at history, there's no reason to think that we are going to have some fundamental shift, and we're all going to vacate cities for small towns or for rural Wales, as beautiful as it is. So I think all that investment, it was a question somebody put in a bit earlier, but why are we still investing in it? Because I think if you take a long-term view, I think we would look back in 15 years and be furious with ourselves if we stopped.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right, Laura. Cities find a way of evolving and adapting to the circumstances in which they find themselves. And I remember, April, May of last year, people telling me that there was no future for the office because everybody was delighted to be working from home. And of course, when the sun's shining and you can get out for a walk and you can go in the back garden if you're lucky enough to have a garden, it's a very different prospect than when you're stuck in the house with the central heating on full blast and you've got a laptop on your knee and you're staring at the screen all day. And certainly our experience of many of our members and some of the big corporates actually who took a slightly different view this time last year is that working from work is actually going to be something that people will want to do in the future, albeit perhaps with more flexibility and adaptability. And again, I'd have to say to you, I think that was happening anyway. I think people were being allowed to be more flexible in terms of the working life approach, rightly so. But the idea, I think, that people are going to want to work from home for the foreseeable future, after what we've gone through over the last 10 months, is for the birds, in my opinion. Maybe other people have got different views and we can hear about them later. So the other big issue on the agenda, and if you're anything like me, someone who's not had a holiday in 12 months, it's a big deal for me, if no one else on the call. International travel, and Birmingham Airport was a success story and was just having a fantastic time of it, wasn't it, pre-pandemic? There were more routes, there were more airlines showing an interest in flying out of Birmingham. It was becoming a genuine international hub. And of course, that industry sector has taken an absolute battering over the past 10 months, without, I have to say again, appearing to have an awful lot of attention and focus from our politicians or our media. So what are the sort of strategies, plans, proposals that we should be looking to put in place to help our airports back once we get through this awful time that we've experienced, 2020 and the early part of 2021?
I think it will be interesting to see what happens. Because, well, as somebody who's got family who doesn't live in this country, I mean, literally the very second that I can safely travel back to see my parents, I will. So many people have made decisions about where they want to live and work, never based on the thought that they were actually going to be locked down there. So I've got people who work for us who live in France who haven't been able to get home, and so I think it will be interesting. I think we'll probably see a massive boost. So as soon as there is a way to travel safely, and I think that there is, whether that be a travel passport, as you say. I mean, there was a point in time in between where you could, in between the two lockdowns, where countries were saying you're very welcome to come visit, but you have to have a certificate that says that you've had a test in the past 24 hours, and you have to be willing to be tested when you get here. I think given the massive increase in testing, the increase in vaccinations, but I do think it will be hugely challenging, because there will be some countries that are much further forward in vaccination versus some countries that aren't, and how that will be balanced out. Those people who know more about international air travel than me will know. But I think the worrying thing still remains that obviously, as the virus continues to change, and if in different countries we're seeing different strains of it, and that strain, as we're hearing, could potentially impact upon how the vaccines work, then I think there'll be a lot of complication. And as ever, I'm always amused at how quickly crime keeps up with the pace of technology. But I did read in the paper that you can go online already and buy a vaccine certificate for 20 quid off the internet. So, there'll be a lot of work to do to make sure that whatever they put in place is legitimate, and people are genuinely able to trust the systems that are in place. But I think everybody knows what they miss. Most people do miss, whether whether it's a holiday or even seeing friends and family who live further away. That's what everybody misses. What people will return to, my guess is, as soon as they feel safe, is they'll return to exactly what they miss. You know, they opened up the Canaries, didn't they, for 1 week in October, and you know, every single flight was full, despite at that point in time, what people knew and didn't know. So I have high hopes, but I'm probably the people who understand better than me when that exactly will happen and what the timings will be for that. But the airport, sorry, you made the point about HS2,
yeah.
But you know, when HS2 arrives at International, Birmingham Airport will be, I believe it's 36 minutes from the center of London. So, you know, it strategically, it becomes an even more important international hub. And we shouldn't lose sight of that, because, you know, I challenge you to get from Heathrow to, you know, to Paddington in 36 minutes, and you know, but you know, you can do it from International to Euston. So, so I think all that too will continue. There's a lot of big strategic investment that I give high hopes for Birmingham International Airport for sure. And the Commonwealth Games, you know, hopefully by then we'll be able to stage a world-class games, and that will give a big boost to the airport to welcome visitors from the Commonwealth and athletes from the Commonwealth to come to Birmingham next year.
Yeah, I'm going to come on to the games in a second. Actually, I'm just amazed by £20 for a scam test. You can get one for a tenner in Liverpool, but that's another story. Yeah, in terms of opportunities and the potential for Birmingham in particular, but also for the wider West Midlands, Commonwealth Games. Listen, it was seen as being a real catalyst for boosting the economy and boosting the reputation, indeed the international reach of, as I say, Birmingham in particular. And how unlucky have we been in terms of the pandemic striking? But nonetheless, I know there's an awful lot of work going on still to ensure that we have the best possible showcase that we can have. And transport and connectivity will play an integral part of that. So I'm sure, Laura, you're party to those conversations. What are the sort of things that we can begin to hopefully now look forward to next year as far as the games are concerned?
Well, we'll have, as I mentioned before, we've got a couple of big transformational rail projects in Perry Bar as one, and University in the other. But even just this past weekend, a major piece of road infrastructure was changed in Perry Bar. The accommodation that was originally designed for the Athletes Village, it will be new housing, is going up. And if you could sort of take an aerial view of Perry Bar now, you would start to see real change happening on the ground there, which is fantastic. One of the best things about the games is it showcases a lot of assets that we already have. So the Alexander Stadium, which is being rebuilt, but then some new assets. So a new pool in Smethwick in Sandwell, which is, you know, despite COVID and frankly, anybody in big construction jobs will know, Brexit has not been there's something called the Brexit challenge, which they like to price into contracts. But between workforce, weather, pandemic, and Brexit, you know, I think the region is doing a phenomenal job of trying to keep these games on schedule. I'm not sure what else could be thrown at us, really, in trying to host the games 4 years early. I dread to think it's going to be a plague of frogs next, but yeah, so we'll have new assets, we'll have rejuvenized assets, the city center. We're focusing a lot on making sure it's the cleanest, greenest games. So we want people to travel in the most sustainable way. And actually, a lot of our sites are by major transport hubs. So making sure that we've got the capacity in place to do that last mile experience is really important. So how it feels from when you emerge from a train station to, you know, your walk along to that. And then there are things that aren't transport but are transport related, which is how people can sort of move through queues, how we design bus drop-off, et cetera, so that it feels like a smooth situation, so you don't wind up waiting 10 hours when you come out of the opening ceremony for a train. You know, how are we going to deal with increased capacity during that time? What do we do about better bus services? What can we do about shuttle buses running people back and forth to our main train hub? So in the beginning, it was a lot of focus around the big capital projects and how do we get them out to contract. And I feel like we're almost through that bit of the work. And now it's merging how the game's going to operate with what are those capital infrastructures and how do we make sure that it's smooth. And we've got a huge responsibility, but equally, you know, we're working with the organizing committee. They're moving athletes, journalists, VIPs. We're moving workers, you know, spectators, and so we just have a huge amount of movement. And then it's also really important that the city region continues to function for people who just want to go to work. So, you know, we learned a lot from London and how they tried to deal with managing the day-to-day operations of London's network with also the huge increase due to the Olympics. And it will be tough, but what somebody told me, the one thing that nobody wants to read about when it comes to sport is transport, which I thought was sort of clever. But I feel like we're never going to be the good news story, right? We're never going to be on the front page of the paper going, the network really worked today. But we will be on the front page of the paper the day the network doesn't work. So it's a typical, you know, not a lot of upside for us, but a huge amount of downside. So it requires a lot of work. But for me and my team who haven't done this and hosted it before, it's been a fantastic experience. We've learned so much. We are learning so much, and I think we all feel a lot of pride in the games, and you know, really want to put Birmingham and the region in its best light to show the rest of the world what we already know and love about the place that we live and work.
Well, despite all the challenges and the difficulties that you've outlined there, Laura, we're looking forward to, I'm sure it's going to be a fantastic couple of weeks of sport in the city of Birmingham. I'm going to ask people on the panel now who've joined us this afternoon to put their questions. I know there was a question sent in earlier. I'm not quite sure who sent that question in. Can you remind me, Laura? Sorry, Abby. If you take yourself off mute, I'm sick of saying that over the last 9 months. But
sorry, I believe that was from Craig.
Craig, okay. And is Craig on the call with us today?
He is, yeah.
Right, Craig, do you want to put your question to Laura, please?
I'm trying to remember what my question was. I think it's probably been touched upon already by Laura, but it was really about given the uncertainty of travel behaviours and working life, to what extent that shapes decisions now about future investments and future priorities.
Okay, thanks, Craig. Yeah. Can I just, sorry, Laura, before I bring you in to answer that question, can I ask anyone else who's wanting to ask a question to just indicate by either waving at me or using one of the emojis that you can do on this screen? Sorry, Laura.
Sorry, do you want me to take a couple questions or do them one at a time?
Yeah, let's do that. Was Amaddeep, were you waving at me there yet? Do you want to ask your question?
Thanks. Laura, we've heard a lot about the investment that's going into the capital projects, and obviously they're very obvious for all of us to see. And we touched a little bit on micro-mobility with e-scooters, but what other investment are you making in technology, perhaps behind the scenes, that we're not always seeing? Whether to hit the green agenda or whether just to improve the experience for travellers. It would be interesting to hear a little bit more about that technology and innovation piece that's happening on the mobility scene. Thank you.
Okay, I'll take one more for now. So Adam.
Thanks, Frank. Yeah, so I'm actually here in Belgium right now, and I share your woes about international travel, believe me, with family in the UK. So I travel a lot and use, but also what's happening here is there's a big push, as you've had the £22 million grant for the mobility projects. There's big mobility projects here as well. What's been quite key here, though, is obviously ensuring that people are being remunerated correctly for giving up their cars. And you launched something in February last year, paying people to give up their cars. compared to schemes I've seen here in Malta, in Poland, the amount being offered is about half compared to other schemes. So the UK is offering about half compared elsewhere. But also just wondering how schemes such as that have been able to be pushed, because obviously we talked about car-led solutions, or car sharing or car club is sort of a halfway house between public transport and a fully car-led recovery, which we don't want.
Thanks, Adam. Laura, do you want to take those three?
Sure. So if I start with Craig, I was sort of trying to answer your question in the beginning because it came in nice and early, but it is that bit about how do you ensure that decisions that you take in the short term don't hurt you in the long term, right? So people can just say, well, I mean, look, there are only 10% of people riding trains, so no one's ever going to come back to ride the train. So, you know, why would you invest in train stations? Well, of course, it's a nonsense. We're in a specific moment in time, and again, you got to look back at those trends and understand what your long-term objectives are. And if the long-term objectives are about moving more people by clean, green mass transit to help support the environment, then you have to be brave in moments where people are challenging you and hold to that long-term vision. And I do think it's the right thing to do. You know, the population of the West Midlands is growing. We have both indigenous growth, but also, you know, people moving into the region, and you have to plan for that future. It's impossible, of course, to know exactly what it will look like. And if people do work more flexibly, as Frank was suggesting, we will have potentially more capacity on the network that we already have if we use it more intelligently. So if there was an interesting debate I listened to the other day about, you know, can you spread the peak? And on to Adam's question, you know, is it a mobility credit that you give somebody, or actually do you give them a discounted ticket? Is a better investment if you give them a discounted ticket if they travel after 9:30, where you might be carrying a lot more air than passengers? How do you incentivize people to make the most of the assets that they have? But for me, I'm going to double down on public transport because of those two sort of major reasons I gave you before, which is we have an obligation to the environment, and we have an obligation to the people who've been really hard hit by this pandemic, and so those are the two big sort of strategic motivators I use to make sure that we don't turn away from things that are really important and are going to continue to be important as we go forward. We got that great investment from the Future Mobility Zone, and that's been fantastic. And I actually think that when I talk about an integrated transport network, that is part of it. So some of the schemes that we've been doing is we've trialed a 5G enabled tram, which has been great, especially for the depot to understand how we can make more advantage of that. And obviously the West Midlands is a 5G pilot. But the other bit that I haven't talked about at all really are roads. So, you know, if you think about a network as being a certain amount of capacity, right? You can get a certain amount of people on fixed lines, you can get buses. If they're all full like that, that's what you've got to work with, right? But roads and how effective our roads are often get overlooked, right? So everybody knows, you know, if you're driving late and you pull up towards a traffic light and it instantly changes, that makes me feel so good. I don't know, there's something just really cathartic about that, and you just sort of sail through. But actually, you know, our roads all need to be that smart. And I don't talk about smart roads as much as I should, but actually the sensors and the enabling infrastructure that means that our roads can be operated much more intelligently, much more effectively, given priority to cyclists over a bus lane. And our roads aren't very smart yet. And so there's a huge amount of work going in some cases, just fixing some of the sensors, putting in new technologies so that we can have that sort of dynamic management of our roads. You know, they should be able to be much smarter. So that's a huge piece of investment. Another one is through Swift. So we've got our integrated ticketing card. It's the second biggest outside of London. You know, what people tell us they want in a transport system is not rocket science, right? They want it to run on time. They want to be able to understand where they go to get what piece of mode, whether it's bus or rail light rail, they don't want to have to try to find exact change. They just want to pay in a way that's easy, whether that's contactless or another card. And it should feel sort of second nature, right? Some of these things are so basic. I can't believe how often we still get them wrong. It's not complicated what people want from a system, but we're still seeking funding. We need to get to a place where we've got multimodal back office capping like London does. You know, you can cap now on our metro, so you never pay more than the lowest fare with that card. But if you move between bus and metro and rail, you're going to pay 3 times, and that just cannot be beyond the wit of man to get right. So we're still bidding for a lot of funding and putting a lot of interest in our technology about how we get that right. Battery technology and demand responsive transport's really of interest as well, whether eventually that becomes self-driving or not, getting that infrastructure ready again, and that's part of those sensors in the road network. I don't know what the future will hold. Will we all have the ability to be in driverless vehicles? I don't know. I don't even know if I hope so or I don't hope so, but sometimes I want somebody to be driving me around, and sometimes I really like driving. So I can't quite answer that, but making sure that the technology is there to enable whatever changes those bring. I do think demand responsive transport's the next big one, whether that's automated or not. I'm fairly agnostic, but you know, that last mile solution and how you can make more of that demand responsive last mile solution, I think is going to be really important. And then battery technology. So again, this sort of seeps out of transport purism, but into making sure that our, you know, economic supply chain is leading the way on innovative transport. You know, there's a history in this region of always having led on innovative transport, you know, from the beginning. But actually, how do we make sure that we're building that for the next generation, if that makes sense? So ambitions around gigafactory battery technology, you know, supporting the innovation of whether it's different types of light rail schemes or automotive is all really important. So sort of long-winded answer to that question. And then Adam, mobility credits has been a really interesting one. I've never had such a small pilot get so much press coverage. It was people were absolutely fascinated by this concept. Like, what would happen if you paid somebody not to drive their car? What could you give them the right incentivization to make a different set of choices, and what would that have to be? And then do we have the network that could genuinely do it anyway? So is the network good enough? Is the credit system good enough? And we will be through the second phase of FMZ rolling that out again to a slightly wider audience. But I'm interested to get that international experience. And again, it's that.
Well, actually, the reason I asked is we're literally doing it. Me and my fiance, we're about to consider giving up the car in turn for taking money each month rather than her company giving her a car. We're literally about to make that choice.
Oh, I can't wait to hear what you decide. One of the things we always say is that people don't understand the cost of driving, right? Because you buy or you're leasing your car, that's a sunk cost. And then you think the only cost you have is like you fill it up and it's 60 quid or whatever it is, and that's a cost. But you know how much it costs you per journey when you're on public transport, but nobody gives you the per journey cost in your car, which would be the cost of your loan or the borrowing and the amortization of your car, the MOT, the tax, the petrol. And actually, if you ask somebody what is your per unit journey cost every time you commute to work in your car, they'd probably tell you, probably costs a couple quid in petrol. That's not actually the cost of that journey. So I would love to find a way to change the conversations. People are comparing apples to apples, because I think then more people might consider whether or not they're willing to give up their car in exchange to be paid to travel sustainably. And I can't wait to hear what you decide.
Thank you. Thanks, Laura. Fascinating comments on these smart roads initiatives that you've been thinking through as well. And as you say, a topic not often discussed, certainly on forums such as this. So thanks for that. Listen, time for one last question. I'm going to ask Kevin Johnson if if he can come in at this junction. And Ryan, I'll bring you in as well. So 2 quick questions. Start with you, Kevin.
I only wish, Frank, there was more time to talk football, but I better shift on and talk transport, much as I'd love to talk football right now. Laura, can I put 2 questions in one if I can do this? You mentioned about sort of buses and I think also trains effectively being sort of taken over, or their funding changed radically during the pandemic. What do you think are the opportunities coming out of this for structural change in the way that public transport works? And alongside that, we're going to get apparently some kind of devolution white paper this year. It was meant to be at the end of last year. We've seen devolution work or not work in different ways around the country in terms of the pandemic. We've seen some politicians and leaders jump up and down. We've seen some who are quieter. What are you looking for? What are the opportunities in terms of devolution in the transport field that are, where there's an argument for that, which has been supercharged by this pandemic and what you've had to deal with?
Thanks, Kevin. And Ryan, final question from you, sir.
So I look after one of the biggest event hotels in the city, so I'm really interested in the tourism strategy for the city. But what I would like to know is, how's the new infrastructure that's come into the city being promoted out, both nationwide and internationally?
Okay. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.
Laura, a few easy ones to end with there.
Well, I'll answer Ryan's question, because then everybody can slowly disappear as I get on my soapbox to answer Kevin's, and everyone can just go, oh, I've got another meeting, because I will never stop talking about that topic. But Ryan, actually, probably not much, to be honest. And it's a really good question. I hadn't really thought about it. I work a lot with the growth company. And we try to pull together sort of what that investment looks like, how will it radically change the region, and they do more of that than we do. We're about to relaunch our growth strategy again for Hs2, and hopefully that will pick up on why this is an incredibly important part of the West Midlands to invest in, to visit, etc. But it's a really good question, and it's probably one where I'm not doing as much as I could and should do. So I will take that away, and thank you for that, because actually I think investors do look for infrastructure. And as we look down sort of Centenary Square to Broad Street, where the tram's going, we certainly have seen that, and we think it helps sort of pull that in and pull it in for tourists. And we can probably do more around sort of day tourist ticketing as well, for people who come to visit the area. So I've got a lot to think about on that, but I don't have an excellent answer for you. But I'm happy to talk about it outside this meeting if you've got some good ideas, which I imagine you probably do.
Okay, thank you.
And with Kevin, my answer to you is we have moved further away from devolution in the past 10 months than we had in the past 5 years that I've been 6 years I've been doing this job. Everyone reverts, don't they? They revert to what they're comfortable in the moment that that there's some sort of a crisis. But I will tell you this unequivocally, which is where we have had the devolution of powers and control over our network is where we have been able to be most effective in this pandemic. So whether it is the shuttle bus that I was talking about, whether it's the tram, which we own and operate, and our ability to do things like hand out face masks and try other ways of thinking about how we manage crowds, whether it's managing that timetable, frankly, about giving offers to people coming on. Where we have had the devolution of funding and powers, we have been impactful, and where we have not, we have been less so. And it's nuts to me that that's a transport technical term, that the government funnels money directly to bus companies, when if they passported that through to a transport authority, we could get better outcomes by dictating what terms we needed to see that happen with. So I just give you, just prime examples of, we might have designed the network to be moving people differently during the pandemic, than the private operator did. We might, for example, have been running services down one part of the conurbation when we actually needed to be doing it down the other. We have no control over that unless that funding is passported to us, and we have been advocating for months that elements of some of the funding that goes to buses should be given to mayoral combined authority so that we can best determine what are the services, requirements, patterns, and timetables we need to serve our people. Rail, again, we are now further than we've ever been. All the franchises have been taken back in-house. We had worked incredibly hard to make sure that our franchise agreement reflected the needs that we had here, whether that were Sunday services, later services, et cetera. And we're further from that. You know more than anyone my views on this, which is there is nobody that knows the networks of our regions better than the people who live, work, and operate those networks within the regions. And the less control we have over what services we have and how they operate, the worse of an outcome it is for our residents. So we need seriously and quickly to move back to a position where government trusts city regions to get on and run their networks and the patterns and services and frequencies that work for us and our passengers. And there's a huge job to do there, because as I said, we have less devolution than we had exactly 12 months ago.
Laura, thanks very much for your very candid responses this afternoon. I particularly agree with the comments that you've made in your final answer to the question on devolution there, and certainly that's been the experience across the country, where you've seen combined authorities and regional mayors, and indeed local authorities in places like Lancashire and Cheshire, being given the opportunity to take responsibility with resource, then there's been a far more efficient and effective response to the challenges that we've faced. So yeah, absolutely on the same page as you as far as that's concerned. Let's hope we can turn into that agenda with a bit more positivity post-pandemic. Listen, I hope you've enjoyed this afternoon. Why wouldn't you? I think she's been absolutely fabulous. Thanks very much, Laura. Brilliant contribution. Pity we couldn't do it live as we first planned, of course, when we penciled you in for the leaders' lunch today. But can I also say that if you've enjoyed listening to Laura's comments this afternoon, can you just make you aware that we have the council leader of Birmingham, Ian Ward, we have the mayor of the West Midlands, Andy Street, and we hope to have Labour's candidate Liam Byrne with us in the downtown den over the next couple of months. Many more events as well, which Abby can tell you about if you contact her directly, or indeed if you go onto our website, you'll see details there, largely around B2B connections. If you've not got your downtown bubble yet, then again, contact Abby and she'll make sure that she sits you in one. Hopefully we'll be bursting out of those bubbles in the not too distant future. And I will be able to see you face to face at a live event in Birmingham in the not too distant future.